Guys, in a deal, I really like the phrase, time wounds all deals. Can you guys talk about the importance of timing? Bill, we'll start with you.
Sure.
The importance of timing in an M&A transaction, just keeping the transaction moving, quick response time frames to questions and due diligence questions.
Yeah, it's a question that comes up, and a lot of business owners will say, well, you just want to get a monthly fee, a retainer, and you'll drag this out for as long as possible. And we want to get the deal done. It's an opportunity cost for us to have a client. We want to get the closed transaction, of course. And these processes tend to run themselves, as Michael and Simon know, because once you start making overtures to buyers, they're following up. When are we doing meetings? We submitted an offer. What's the next step? So there's a lot of push from the other side, and that's fair from the buyers. The three words I want to use when you talk about this, and that's slow, schedule, and staff. Because we had a situation a few years ago where the seller absolutely wanted to use an attorney that he knew. I think it was his college roommate, a good friend, good attorney, but had never done an M&A transaction, number one. Number two, did not have staff to support the production of the schedules. We were supposed to close in January, and this attorney didn't know what he was doing. He was negotiating minor little points, or we were having to explain why this paragraph was necessary, as opposed to debating whether it's 4 or 5. That slipped to February, that slipped to March. And what happened is this client lost a big customer that represented about 25% of their business. Well, guess what? The deal we had that should have closed in January, if we would have worked with an attorney with a full staff of junior attorneys and paralegals to help produce these schedules, this deal would have closed in mid-January. And instead, we got bad news in early March. We ended up getting a transaction done with somebody else, but the seller, and it was really his fault, he got a good deal, but got a smaller deal because he lost a substantial amount of business because the transaction took longer than it should have taken.
Mm-hmm. Michael, what's your experience with timing and deals dragging out and the impact on it?
I think for the most part, we're selling a smaller company to a much larger company. And to the extent that the much larger company wants this to move fast, it's a fixed cost, whether they're spending $50 million or $500 million. And so to the extent that they're looking at potentially a messy transaction, they make a request and a week later, the answer comes back. I think it drags them and depresses them, versus that pretty sim they saw. So I think there's a certain aspect of buyers really want this, to be made easier, especially larger buyers. And then the second example I'll use is we had a transaction and it was being dragged out, and then sure enough, this is when Trump just got elected. He put tariffs on Canadian imports and exports, and all of a sudden, something that you never thought could have ever happened, happened. And so, it's just, time is, I'll say, it never helps transactions. And so those would be the two examples I would give.
Yeah. Simon, can you give us your experience and maybe some stories around timing and deal issues around timing?
Yes, I think I'm selling a business to a US buyer at the moment. Not all our deals are cross-border, by the way, but they do present some good examples. They've done 80 or 90 transactions in the last 5 years, and they have been so good to deal with because they know exactly what they want, and they want to close this before Christmas. And we agreed the LOI just a week ago, and so they've got everyone in the data room. They've got a full internal team that focus on transactions, and it's great. You also know if you're selling to a family business, though, that's the other extreme, because especially if they haven't done a transaction before, and yet they've put the best price forward, but then they start wondering, then they get a bit conservative, then they don't want to spend money on lawyers just yet because they want to make sure everything's okay and their due diligence, and they do things sequentially rather than all in parallel. And then that can have an impact. But actually, the buyer pool I found sometimes the most difficult is private equity, because your point around time is important, but from a buyer private equity, they sometimes like to do due diligence by time. And that means that if, a company has said that its forecast or budget is going up each month, and it's backed off in the year, and maybe they've got their best months towards the end of the year, private equity are great about spinning along the due diligence, because they just want to test it every month to make sure the company is hitting their targets. And so you've got to watch out for buyers like that, because we also know that the company may not hit all its targets, and then the transaction will get renegotiated. So we've got to be very strong on the project management and make sure that we push them at every opportunity.
Yeah, I guess a couple of points I'll make on that. I mean, the longer the transaction goes, the more things that can go wrong, as we know. And then, if both buyers and sellers are moving a transaction along, it just shows, intent and commitment on both parties' part to get a deal done, which I think, kind of just lends to the trust factor of closing a deal.